a heavy door slammed shut behind her. The bolt slid into place. A fist pounded the wood from the inside, but no one opened it again. She stood barefoot in the cold with nothing in her hands. No coat. No coin. No name worth speaking. The wind cut through her thin dress. Behind those iron gates stood every man and woman who had called her family that morning. None of them looked at her now. They had stripped her of her name and her future. They had given her one road and one direction. Walk. So Ilara walked. Hours later, she came to a place no one in the kingdom wanted. A black shape on a bare hill. The ruined castle they all swore was cursed. What did this banished girl find inside those forgotten walls that would soon turn a whole kingdom pale? Stay with me on this one. The road behind her ran for 3 days. The food she had eaten was a heel of bread thrown by a baker's wife. The cloak on her back had been left on a fence post by someone who did not want to be seen helping her. 3 days. 3 small acts of pity. That was the kingdom's full answer to her name. Her name still mattered, even if the law said it did not. Her father had been Duke Renault of the Western Marches. A good man. A quiet man. He had died in his bed 2 winters back. Or so the story went. Ilara had her own thoughts on that. Her father's brother, Lord Garrick, had taken the regency the same week. He moved her into a small tower in his keep. He married her mother to one of his knights within a season. And on her 19th name day, he walked her into his hall, read out a charge of treason against the crown, and had her stripped of name and rights and marched to the western border. The charge was a lie. The reason was simple. Ilara had seen something the night her father stopped breathing. She had seen Garrick leave his chambers with a small green bottle in his hand. She had told 3 people. All 3 were dead inside the year. So she walked. She walked until her feet bled through her shoes. She walked until the kingdom thinned out into broken farms and dead mills. She walked until she stood at the edge of a valley no living person used. The castle waited at the top. People in the last village had begged her not to go. They crossed themselves when she asked the road. They told her stories. A merchant who tried to claim the place 10 years ago had been found at the bottom of the well, drowned upright with his eyes open. A captain of the guard who rode in to clear it came out 3 days later with white hair and never spoke again. A boy who climbed the wall on a dare had simply vanished. His sister heard him crying on the wind for a year. All of this was meant to keep her out. It did not. Ilara had nowhere else. Banished meant banished. If she walked back into any village within 200 miles, the law said any man could kill her without crime. The cursed castle was the only thing in the world her uncle could not strip from her, because no one wanted it. The old crown laws were plain on this. Unclaimed land could be taken by anyone with the courage to take it. And nothing in the kingdom was more unclaimed than the place on the hill. She climbed the path. Thorn and creeper had grown across the stones. The gate hung open on one hinge. The other had rusted black and snapped a long time ago. She stepped through. The courtyard was full of leaves. There were bones in one corner. A horse's skull picked clean. A rusted helmet beside it. Whatever had ended that rider, it had ended his horse too. Ilara stopped at the center of the yard. She turned in a slow circle. She spoke out loud, even though she was alone. "My name is Ilara of the Western Marches," she said. "My father was Duke Renault. I have been cast out by my uncle. I have nowhere else in the world. I claim this castle by the old laws. If there is anything in here that wants me dead, do it now and be done." The wind moved across the stones. Nothing answered. No voice. No shadow. She stood and waited a long time. Then she walked to the great door of the keep. It was a heavy bronze door, taller than two men, carved with figures she did not know. She put her shoulder against it. It did not move. She looked along the seam. There was a keyhole, black with age. She turned and walked back to the bones in the courtyard. She knelt. She lifted the rusted helmet aside. Beneath it, half buried in dirt, lay a chain. She pulled the chain out of the earth. On the end of the chain was an iron key. The key was warm in her hand. That was the first thing in 3 days that did not feel like dying. She walked back to the bronze door, slid the key into the black lock and turned it. Something heavy clicked deep inside the wood. The door cracked open by a finger's width. She pushed it the rest of the way and stepped inside. The hall was dark. Cold air moved through it. She stood inside the bronze door for a long moment, listening, before she took another step. Light came in through tall, narrow windows along one wall. The glass was gone. The stone frames remained. The light fell on dust thicker than carpet. Long shapes were folded over chairs and tables. Sheets that had been white once and were the color of old ash now. A long table ran down the middle. A stone fireplace stood at one end, big enough for 2 men to stand inside. 3 doors led off in 3 directions. Elara moved slowly. She did not know what she was afraid of finding. A body. A trap. A pit in the floor. None of those things were there. Just dust. She lifted a sheet. Beneath it was a high-backed chair, carved from dark wood. The cushion crumbled to dust at her touch. She lifted another. A long bench. She lifted a third. A cradle. She stepped back from that one. She did not know why a cradle made her stop, but it did. She left the great hall through a side door. The hallway behind it was lined with paintings. The faces had gone dark with age and damp. She could not make out a single one. But the last frame at the end of the hall held no face at all. The canvas had been cut clean out. A black square where a person should have been. She moved past it. She found a kitchen. Pots still hung on the wall, green with rust. A table. A pile of small bones in the cold hearth. Mice. Or something that ate mice. She found a stairwell that climbed. She climbed. The next floor held bedrooms with collapsed ceilings. The floor above that held a room she stopped breathing inside. It was a study. The study had been used. Recently was not the word. But not for centuries either. The dust on the desk was thinner than it should have been. There was a journal on the desk. Leather soft with age. There was an inkwell beside it, dry. There was a candle, half melted. There was no body. Elara sat down at the desk. The chair held her weight. She opened the journal. The first page read in a steady hand. If you are reading this, you have walked into my house, and the house has chosen to let you read. The handwriting was not afraid. It was patient. It was the writing of a woman who had lived alone a long time, and who had learned to speak to a person she would never meet. Elara read on. My name is Marin. I was the daughter of Queen Aliana. I was the sister of the king who sits on the throne the year you read this, or his son, or his son's son. I was banished from the court at the age of 20 for a crime I did not commit. The crime was knowing too much about a brother who would one day wear the crown. Elara stopped breathing. She read the line again. She read it a third time. Marin had been banished too. By a brother. For knowing too much. Elara sat in that dust and that silence and felt, for the first time in 3 days, that she was not the first. She read the rest of the journal slowly. It was not a diary. It was instructions. It was the careful work of a woman who knew that someday another woman like her would walk through that bronze door, and who wanted that woman to have a chance. The journal told her where the food stores were. Sealed root cellars under the kitchens. Grain in clay jars treated against rot. Honey in stone pots. A woman could eat from those stores for 2 years if she was careful. The journal told her where the clean water came from. A spring under the keep, walled off from the surface, wells the villagers' stories warned about. Cold and good. The journal told her about the gardens. Walled gardens behind the keep, gone wild but still alive. Apple trees old and twisted. Herbs running rampant. A patch of strong tobacco. A patch of stronger nightshade. The journal told her about the locks. Some opened with the iron key she had already found. Some opened with other keys, and the journal said where to look. Some did not open with any key. Those, the journal said, would open when the castle decided. Alara read until the light failed. When the light failed, she heard the gate. A man's voice was shouting in the courtyard. A boot on stone. A second voice lower, telling the first to be quiet. 2 of them. At least 2. Alara went still. She crept to the window of the study. She looked down. 2 men were inside her gate. One was big. One was small. Both had knives. The big one was carrying a length of rope. They had not seen her yet. They were checking the courtyard the way you check a place before you settle in. The big one looked up at the keep. His eyes met the window. Alara stepped back. She heard him laugh. She heard him say to the smaller one, "There she is. Told you she'd come this far. Get the rope." She heard them start to move. Then she heard something else. She heard the bronze door slam shut. She had not closed it. The men in the courtyard heard it too. The big one stopped. He looked at the door. He looked at his friend. The smaller man took a step backward. The wind picked up. It picked up fast. Dust lifted off the courtyard stones in a wave and rolled at them. The smaller man broke first. He turned and ran for the gate. He was halfway through it when the gate dropped its broken hinge and fell across his back. He went down screaming. The big one stood frozen. Just a breath. Then he ran too. He cleared the gate. He did not look back. He went down the path so fast his feet barely touched the ground. The smaller man crawled out from under the gate, dragged himself a few feet, and limped after him. He was sobbing. He did not look back either. Alara watched them go. Her hands were on the windowsill. They were not shaking. She stood there until both men were gone from the path. She climbed back down the stairs. She crossed the great hall. She built a small fire in the great fireplace, with old dry wood from a corner stack. She broke off a piece of stale bread from her pack. She sat on the stone hearth. For the first time in 3 days, her shoulders dropped. She thought, maybe I am safe here. Maybe the worst is past. A horn sounded outside the wall. It was a long, deep note. The kind of horn a herald used. The kind a single man with a single horse would not be carrying. Alara opened her eyes. She did not move. She listened. The horn sounded again. Then a third time. She climbed back up to the study window. The valley below the castle had been empty an hour ago. It was not empty now. A column of riders had come up the road. She counted as best she could. 40 men. Maybe more. They had stopped at the foot of the hill. They had banners. Even at that distance, she knew the banner. A black hawk on a green field. Her uncle's hawk. Garrick's hawk. 40 riders had ridden 3 days for her. She felt the floor tilt. This was not survival anymore. This had been survival when it was hunger and cold, and one strange man with a rope. This was something else. Alara understood, sitting by that window, that her uncle had not banished her to die in a ditch. He had banished her to disappear quietly. The cursed castle was supposed to swallow her the way it had swallowed everyone else who came near. When word reached him that she had walked up the path and not come down, he was supposed to be free of her. He was not free, because somebody at his court had remembered the old law. The same law she had remembered. Unclaimed land. 1 moon cycle of residence. After that, hers by the crown's own writing. And once it was hers by law, she had a title again. And once she had a title, she had a voice. And once she had a voice, she could speak about a small green bottle. So Garrick had ridden. She had until the next full moon to be alive on this hill. She had counted on the road. It was 22 days away. A herald came up the path on a gray horse. He stopped a careful distance from the broken gate. He read her uncle's words in a clean, loud voice that carried easily up the keep. The girl Alara, lately of the western marches, was in unlawful occupation of crown property. She was to walk out, alone, unarmed, by sundown. If she did, she would be permitted to take her case to the king's court. If she did not, the castle would be entered by force, and she would be removed. It was a lie inside a lie. There was no king's court for a banished woman. If she walked out, she was dead before nightfall. She did not answer the herald. She watched him go. When he reached the column at the bottom of the hill, she saw the men dismount. They began to set tents. They were not leaving. They were settling. She turned from the window. She went back to the desk and the journal. She did not flip pages. She read. Marin had written about this too. Different uncle. Different year. Same column of writers at the bottom of the same hill. Same herald. Same lie about a court. Marin had survived it. The journal told her how. There was a tunnel under the keep. It came out 2 miles down the valley, in a thicket. It had been dug by the first lord of the castle in case of siege, and it had not been sealed. Those children had had children. Marin had left names. Old names, but Alara recognized 2 of them. They were names of families that still lived close. Families whose grandparents had been protected by Marin in some quiet way Alara did not yet understand. The journal said, "These people will not refuse a request from the lady of this house. They will not say so out loud. But they will not refuse." Alara turned the page. The next page was different. The handwriting on the next page was older, harder. It was a list of names. It was a list of witnesses. It was Marin's evidence. Marin had documented her own brother, the king of 40 years ago, for the murder of their father, the old king. She had named the physician who supplied the poison. She had named the cup-bearer who carried it. She had named the page who watched. Alara held her breath. Marin wrote at the bottom of the list, "I never sent this. I was alone. I was afraid. I waited for help that did not come. If you are reading this, do not wait. Send it." Alara closed the journal. She knew what to do. If you're still with me on this, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing, and it tells me to keep telling stories like this one. Then come right back, because what she did over the next 22 days is the part nobody tells. Alara walked to the chapel. She found the loose stone in the wall behind the altar. It moved under her hand. She slid it aside. The armory behind it was dry. There were swords oiled and dark. There were spears in racks. There were short bows, the wood still good. There were arrows in bundles. There were small clay pots whose labels had faded but whose smell, when she opened one, was the cold, sharp smell of pitch. She did not pick up a sword. She picked up a quill instead, and a stack of sealed parchment from a shelf at the back of the armory, where Marin had left them. She copied her own letter that night. 6 copies. Each one named her uncle. Each one named the small green bottle. Each one named the 3 people who had died for hearing her say it. Each one named Marin's witnesses, too, as far as their grandchildren still walked the kingdom. She sealed each letter with wax from the candle on the desk. Then she went to find the tunnel. The tunnel was where the journal said it would be. A section of floor in the old wine cellar, hinged on iron pins, dropping down into a stairwell cut from rock. Cold air came up out of it. Old cold. The kind that has not been disturbed in 100 years. She lit a small oil lamp from the armory. She went down. The tunnel was straight and long and dry. It ran under the hill and out into the valley. After what she guessed was 2 miles, the floor began to climb. The exit was a stone slab in the roof, set with a ring. She pushed it up a hand's width. She saw thicket. She saw stars. She heard nothing close. She came up under the brambles. She left the 6 letters in a hollow oak Marin's journal had named, 200 steps east of the tunnel. The hollow oak was still standing. The first letter Marin had ever left there was still inside it, untouched, brown as bark, beyond reading. Ilara put her own letters on top of it. She closed the cavity with moss. Then she went back. By dawn she was inside the bronze door again, with her boots wet and her hands shaking. 21 days to go. Word travels in a kingdom whether you want it to or not. The hollow oak was on land that belonged to a charcoal burner named Petrek, whose grandmother had once been Marin's washerwoman. Petrek checked the oak twice a year by old habit. Nobody had ever explained to him. Petrek found the letters 2 days after Ilara left them. Petrek did not open them. Petrek had been told by his grandmother, who had been told by her mother, that letters from this oak were not for him. Petrek delivered them. By the 7th day after Garek's column made camp at the bottom of Ilara's hill, the high physician of the realm, an old man named Brennel who had been waiting 40 years to be asked the right question, stood in front of the king's council and said yes. Yes, he had supplied a green bottle. Yes, he had been told it was for rats. Yes, he had known better. Yes, the man who had asked for it had been the king's brother, then a young lord, later the regent of the Western Marches. By the 10th day, 3 abbeys had read Ilara's letter from the pulpit. By the 12th day, the neighboring lord, a man named Ostran whose mother had been one of Marin's letter children, rode into the capital with a copy of her list of names and refused to leave the king's court until he had been heard. By the 15th day, the capital was hot. None of this had reached Garek yet, in his tents at the bottom of the valley. He was a man who had never lost. He had not built a habit of asking for news. He was watching the keep and waiting for hunger to do his work. On the 18th day, he ran out of patience. 40 men came up the path before sunrise. Ladders, rope, fire. Ilara was in the gate tower. She had not slept in 3 days, but her hands were steady. The journal had taught her where the tripstones lay, where the boiling pots waited, where the old sluice would tip, where the pitch was already poured into the channels along the walls. The first ladder went up. She lit the pitch. The fire ran along the wall in a bright thin line, top to bottom, faster than a man could climb. The ladders went up burning. The men on them dropped or jumped. The ones who jumped landed in a courtyard floor that gave under them. Old planks. Old work. Marin's work. The second wave never reached the wall. The bowmen from the trees never got a clean shot. The keep's narrow windows were better cover than open ground. By midday, 15 of Garrick's men were dead, and the rest had fallen back down the hill. Garrick himself rode up at the head of a small group under a white cloth that afternoon. He stopped at the broken gate. He looked up at the wall. Ilara walked to the wall and looked down. She had not seen her uncle in 3 months. He was older than she remembered. Smaller. He had always seemed bigger when he was sentencing her. He shouted up at her. He said the things uncles like him say. Come down. End this. Be reasonable. There can be a place for you. He could not, of course, look reasonable while saying any of it. When he stopped, she spoke. Quietly. The wind carried. She told him she had read Marin's journal. She told him the letters were already gone. She named the physician. She named the cupbearer. She named the page. She named the small green bottle. She watched the color leave his face from the top of the wall. He turned his horse so fast it nearly threw him. He went back down the path at a gallop, leaving his white cloth in the dirt. The next morning, a second column appeared in the valley. A bigger column. A different banner. The king's own banner, the one Garrick had been hiding behind for years. The men around it were not Garrick's men. They were the king's. The king had heard. They surrounded Garrick's tents at the bottom of the hill before noon. But Garrick did not surrender. He waited for the dark. On the night of the full moon, he came up the path with 12 men he could still trust. Quietly, the royal column at his back assumed he was sleeping in his tent and let him alone. He climbed a part of the wall the journal had said could be climbed. He came over the top. He came for her. He cut down 2 of the trip wires before they took him. He stepped over the man-trap by accident and luck. He reached the great hall. The bronze door was open. The fire was lit. She was sitting in the high-backed chair Marin had once used. He raised his sword. The bronze door swung shut behind him on no one's hand. The fire jumped in the hearth. The dust on the floor lifted. Around the long table, sheets that had been folded over chairs slid sideways, and the chairs were not empty. They had not been empty for a long time. He could see them now. So could she. There were 8 of them. All women. All ages. All quiet. None of them spoke. Garrick's sword fell out of his hand. Ilara stood up. She walked past him. She reached the bronze door, slid the iron key into a lock he had not seen, and turned it. Then she walked out of the great hall and let the door close behind her. The full moon was full and high over the courtyard. By the old laws of the crown, the castle was hers. The morning after the full moon was the brightest morning the valley had seen in a long time. The king's men found Garrick in the courtyard. He was alive. He was sitting against the wall, eyes open. He did not speak. He did not look at them. His hair was white. The captain who knelt in front of him asked his name, his rank, his title. Garrick did not answer to any of them. He had not lost his voice, the captain reported later. He had simply chosen never to use it again. They took him down the hill in a cart. The trial in the capital lasted 3 days. The physician Brennel testified. The cupbearer's son testified. 2 of Garrick's own knights, men he had bought, broke and testified. Marin's witness list, 40 years old, was read into the record. The Crown found Lord Garrick of the Western Marches guilty of regicide twice. Once for the old king of 40 years past. Once for Duke Renault. He was sentenced to be hanged. He went to the rope still without speaking. Some say his eyes never blinked. Some say they did once when his name was read. The king who had inherited Garrick as a regent was a young man with a tired face. He came to the castle himself 2 months after the trial with a small escort. He stood in Alara's courtyard. He took off his crown for one breath, set it against his chest, and put it back on. It was the closest thing to an apology a king of that line had ever given. He offered her a place at court. He offered her her father's lands. He offered her a marriage to any man she pointed to. He offered her gold. Alara stood at the bronze door of the keep and listened to all of it. When he was done, she said no. She said she would keep the castle. She said she would take her father's lands, but she would govern them from this hill, not from any city. She said she would not marry a man chosen by anyone but herself. She said she wanted one law passed. One, the old law about banished women. It would be changed. A woman could no longer be banished by the word of one lord alone. 3 lords with 3 witnesses, with one of those lords being unrelated to her family. Or no banishment. The king listened. The king agreed. The king rode down the hill. The law passed in the spring. Word of all of it traveled, as word does. The first woman walked up the path in the early summer. She was older than Alara. She was thin. Her hand had been broken and badly set. She had been a baker's wife in a town 3 valleys east. Her husband had died. Her husband's brother had inherited the bakery. Her husband's brother had not wanted her in the house. She had been told to leave by sundown. She climbed the path. She stopped at the broken gate, which Alara had not yet rebuilt because she liked the look of it, and she said her name. Alara walked down from the keep and met her at the gate. She brought her inside. She gave her bread. She gave her a room above the kitchens. She gave her work. The next woman came in the autumn. She was 19, and she had been turned out by her father for refusing a marriage. The next 2 came in the winter together, sisters whose village had burned and whose male relatives had decided not to feed extra mouths. By the 2nd spring, there were 11 women in the castle. By the 5th spring, there were 40. The castle stopped being called Cursed. It stopped being called a ruin. It started being called by its old name, which Marin's journal had given. The Hold of Quiet Hands. The villagers shortened it. The Quiet Hold. Alara never married. She never wore a crown. She did not need to. She kept the journal Marin had left for her on the desk in the study. She added her own pages to it. She wrote on the first page she added the same line Marin had used. If you are reading this, you have walked into my house, and the house has chosen to let you read. Then she wrote beneath it in her own hand. You are not the first. You will not be the last. Sit down. She lived to be old. She died on a quiet morning in her own bed, with 2 of the youngest women at her side. The bronze door of the keep was open that morning. The wind moved through it. Nothing else. The castle had a new lady by sundown. She had been chosen by the women who lived there. The crown did not interfere. The crown had learned not to. A long time later, when the kingdom was a different kingdom, and the king on the throne was a great-great-grandson of the king who had taken off his crown for one breath in Alara's courtyard, a young woman walked up the road to the quiet hold with nothing in her hands. No coat. No coin. No name worth speaking, by her own family's choice. She climbed the path. The bronze door of the keep was open. A woman walked down to meet her at the gate. The first thing she said was, "You are not the first." The wind moved across the stones. This time it was warm.